We had to switch rooms, as you can tell from the background. I'm just talking to the people online. Because there's a choir rehearsal for the Interfaith Thanksgiving service, and we thought that that would be a little bit distracting. Even though they sound nice, it's a little bit distracting. Okay. So let me just close the door. So before we begin tonight's topic, which is the last, the third of our three-part series on the recent decisions of the Law Committee, may non-Jews open the Ark? Are there any questions left over from last week or the week before that anybody has for us? Yes, Sid.
It was my understanding that the issues that go to the Law Committee usually involve something new and different, past practice.
Right.
And I was a little confused last week about the referral process, what you should and shouldn't do, tell the truth.
Right.
And I thought these are basic principles that we've lived by for years.
Right.
Why the Law Committee?
So Sid raises a question, asking that he thought that the Law Committee deals with new things and not necessarily old, matters that are common sense or that are matters that have been dealt with before. So yes and no is the answer. It depends on what the issue is. So for example, the issue of sports and exercise on Shabbat, you would think, has been dealt with before as well, because the laws of Shabbat go back, as the rabbis interpret them, go back 1,800 years. So what constitutes work, fire, all of that has been dealt with already. So the issue is that it's there are elements of it that could be new in how we are treating the subject. So in other words, perhaps there are ways to exercise and do sports that are different than they were 1,800 years ago. So, we know for sure that equipment for some sports has been streamlined, and even though they're stronger, they look a lot lighter. So perhaps issues like that make it worth bringing up again. So the referrals, references for a job or for school, even though, yes, the fact that we are not supposed to lie is one of the basic principles of Judaism and what it means to be a moral, ethical, religious person. There are aspects about this that may not have been dealt with in the sources before, and so perhaps when a rabbi asked the question of the Law Committee said, you know what, maybe we should have a statement from the Law Committee that represents the conservative movement's approach to this, because it adds to the cachet of what it means to be a conservative Jew. So even though giving references is something that we do frequently at work, it's important to know that there's a Jewish context for it, and in fact a conservative Jewish context for it. So I think in some ways, if there's a lesson to be learned from it, even though it might be an older issue or something that's been dealt with before, the Law Committee chair figures it's warranted to discuss in a modern conservative Jewish context. So which leads us to our question this evening. This is a question, the role of non-Jews in the service is a question for non-Orthodox congregations, and has been a question for a couple of generations. So there are a couple things I want to say about this, and then we notice, of course, that the Teshuvah, the paper that we're going to be talking about tonight, is the shortest of the three papers because there's not much from Jewish law about it when it comes to opening the ark. So let me talk about the Jewish legal aspect of it, and then the bulk of our class this evening will be on the sociological implications of it. So, synagogues have been found by archaeologists in Israel, in Syria, that go back 1,500 years. So some of us who have been to Israel before and been on a group tour may have stopped off at the town called Sipori, which is up north near Nazareth, which is a more recent town that's been uncovered by archaeologists. And there are 3 synagogues, beautiful synagogues, that have been uncovered in that town. Beautiful mosaic floors there. If you've been to Masada, almost all of us who have been to Israel have been to Masada. You've been on top, and there's a synagogue on top of Masada. So that synagogue perhaps is the oldest synagogue that has been ever found, because Masada, if we take the history, if the history is accurate from Josephus, then Masada is nearly 2,000 years old. So that synagogue, or that that area that has been designated as a synagogue by the archaeologists who have uncovered it, would be one of the oldest synagogues ever found in the world. Beit Alpha, maybe you've heard of that, another synagogue mosaic near Beit Sha'an in the Jordan Valley on the way up to Tiberias. Lots of synagogues found. Capernaum, as it's called in English, or Kfar Nahum in Hebrew, a place where Jesus preached from, is a synagogue on the shores of Tiberias. All of these places have arks. So that's a feature of the ancient synagogue. So it's not new. It's not part of modern synagogue architectures that we have an ark. An ark is an ancient element, an integral element, just as the Ner Tamid, the eternal light, is an aspect of synagogue architecture. So the ark is always on the wall or on the side of the building that faces towards Jerusalem, and we know that. So it's not just part of architecture in synagogues today. It goes back to the first synagogues that archaeologists have found. So there's always been an ark, always on the wall or the side of the building that faces towards Jerusalem. So the synagogue in Kfar Nahum, the ark would be on the southern wall, because Tiberias, Kfar Nahum, the Sea of Galilee, is north of Jerusalem, so you're facing south. Masada, the synagogue is facing west, because Masada, or actually it's facing northwest, because it is southeast of Jerusalem. Okay, so you get the idea. So there have always been an ark, therefore there's always been a Torah inside that ark. Okay, so the oldest manuscript of a Torah that we have is from the Dead Sea Scrolls. So I don't think a Torah was found in that synagogue on Masada, but certainly manuscripts of the entire Bible, except for the book of Esther, the entire Bible, manuscripts of the entire Bible, have been found in the Dead Sea Scrolls. Okay, so we know that Torah scrolls are found in that ark. So we also know that the reading of the Torah is something that is done publicly in synagogue. So you can't read the Torah if it's in the ark. So somebody logistically, choreographically, has to take the Torah out of the ark and take it somewhere so that it can be opened and read. Okay, it just makes sense. So every synagogue has their system and how they do that. So we have Gabaim who help in taking care of behind the scenes of giving out the honors and ensuring that everything flows smoothly in the service. And so I'm the one who choreographs taking the Torah out of the ark and giving it to whoever's going to be carrying it around the congregation, and then placing it on the lectern from which we read from the Torah. So there's something like that that takes place in every single synagogue in the world. So every synagogue of every denomination reads from the Torah. What they read from it, how they read from it, is different, because a Reformed synagogue, they might take the Torah out of the ark and then not open it. And then how much we read from it all depends on the kind of synagogue it is. But no matter the synagogue in the world, Ashkenazi or Sephardi, a Torah is taken out of the ark and it is read from. So the question then is, who can open the ark? And is that an important honor to even talk about in the law codes? So we saw in the paper that there's not much said about it, and whatever is said about it, the category of opening the ark is a lesser honor. Don't tell anybody. But we have the program for the service this Shabbat, and there are ark openers here. Shh, don't tell them that it's not as important an honor as anything else. What?
Less honor compared to
less honor compared to having an aliyah or leading the service. Okay, so in other words, the most important part of the service is reciting the blessings, whether it's blessings for the aliyah, right? Baruch Hu Adonai Havarach, that aliyah. So there's a blessing there. That at the end, Baruch Atah Adonai Asher Bachar Banu Mikol Hamim, that blessing, Notein HaTorah, people say Amen. Even the Torah reader says Amen. So that's the important part, that they're reciting a blessing by which the congregation responds Amen. By responding Amen, it's as if you have said the blessing yourself. All right, so it dates back to the time when not everybody had a prayer book in front of them. Right, before the printing press, books were expensive because they were handwritten, and they were written on parchment or papyrus, and it took a while for someone to write it. And the fancier they wrote it, the more expensive it is. So like Haggadahs, like the Sarajevo Haggadah and other Haggadahs like that, very fancy illuminated manuscripts, you know that rich people contracted with someone to design that Haggadah, to write the Haggadah, and then to draw the pictures in it too. So the same with prayer books. So in order to fulfill your responsibility to recite the blessing, because some of the blessings, so having an aliyah, not everybody can do. But reciting the service, everybody needs to do. And there are parts of the service where we want to ensure that everybody says the words appropriately. That's why the Amidah is repeated out loud to ensure that everyone hears the words correctly. So when we go Baruch Hu Uvaruch Shemo, after we hear Baruch Atah Adonai, and we say Amen, it's as if we've said the blessing ourselves. So that's the most important part of the Yach Tzibur, the emissary of the community. That's their job. They're representing the community by reciting the prayer so that we can say Amen. So it's a partnership. They're saying it for us. We say Amen. It's as if we've said it too. So that's the most important part of the service. So doing some choreography, the logistics of taking the Torah out of the ark and putting it on the lectern, that isn't as important because you don't say Amen to anything like that. There's no blessing that's recited to take the Torah out of the ark. Now, you could think it is a mitzvah. It's a mitzvah to read from the Torah, but you get the mitzvah, the blessing for that mitzvah, by having the aliyah. Okay? So, Asher Natan Lanu Torat Emet V'Chaye Olam, right? He gave us a Torah of truth. Praise to you, God, who gives us the Torah. So that could be the blessing that covers taking the Torah out of the ark too. So there's no blessing that's recited. We also know from the halachic sources that anybody can touch a Torah, and it doesn't affect the status of the Torah. So some people think that if they're ritually impure, which in a generation ago, when many synagogues were not egalitarian, one issue behind that was that some people thought falsely that women couldn't participate equally in the service because there could be a time of the month that a woman is impure and it would be inappropriate for her to touch the Torah in that state. of ritual impurity, and therefore a woman could not have an aliyah because she would be making the Torah impure. So that's all Bubba Mises, and it's not true at all. Nothing makes the Torah impure. Okay, so which gets to the phrase that anybody, even a Kutian, can touch the Torah. So that's a different conversation for another time. What is a Kutian? So in the paper, it suggests that it's a Samaritan. So the phrase "a good Samaritan." So there was a segment of the population of Israel known as Samaritans, people in Shomron, Samaria, who were Samaritans. So they were Jewish light. Okay, so they weren't officially part of the Jewish community, but they acted Jewish, and they had their own Bible, which is a little bit different than the Jewish Bible. The Samaritan Bible, and there's a community of them still today that practice, or that I still remember taking a field trip when I was in Israel for my junior year at Hebrew University. So the Samaritan Passover is a big deal, to go to the mountain that is outside of the town of Shechem. So at the time, Shechem is Nablus. It's in the West Bank. So not exactly a safe trip to take today, but when I was back in the day, when it was my junior year in 1982, it was still safe to travel through the West Bank. And so we took a field trip, a Hebrew University sponsored trip to Shechem, to this mountain outside of Shechem. I don't remember the name of the mountain off the top of my head right now, but that's where the Samaritans had their sacrifice of the Passover sacrifice. So not quite Jewish, but similar to Jewish practice. And again, the Samaritan Bible is an ancient text, goes back at least 2,000 years. So scholars who are doing biblical studies would use the Samaritan Bible as a text, along with the Septuagint, which is the Greek translation of the Bible, as ancient text to find out the variant readings and things like that. But again, the book of Ezra talks about the Samaritans. So they are a community of people who didn't go into exile with the Jews, who were there when the Jews came back from Babylonia. The Jews were intermarrying with the Samaritans, which is why Ezra said that now what determines the religion of the child is the religion of the mother. It's all about the mixed marriage, mixing with the Samaritans. So maybe that's who the Kutians are, these semi-Jewish people, or maybe they're totally non-Jewish people. But whatever it is, what is a Kutian doing in a synagogue anyway? For why would they want to open the ark? So it has to be somebody who has a reason for being in a synagogue. It's not like you're inviting the Roman soldier in. Hey, Lucifer, or whatever, some Latin name. Pontius Pilate, why don't you come into the synagogue now? We want to give you an honor. Maybe you won't kill us if you give us an honor. I don't know, but there has to be a reason for somebody to be there. So possibly if it's a Samaritan and they're Jewish light, they might want to be in a synagogue because maybe their relatives are in the synagogue. Okay, so it could be an example of an early kind of mixed marriage. So yes, David.
I could be wrong.
Yes.
But I always believed that the difference between the Samaritan and Jews is that the Samaritan only believed in the Bible proper and did not accept all the following writings.
Right. So David is talking about, maybe he heard that the Samaritans, the difference between Samaritans and Jews, the Samaritans only accept the Bible. I think you might be thinking of Karaites. So the Karaites are Jews who don't follow the rabbis. So they don't accept the Mishnah and the Talmud and any other rabbinic interpretation of Judaism, but they are Jews. All rabbis over all the ages say that Karaites, when push comes to shove, they don't like the Karaites because they want everybody to follow the rabbis. But when push comes to shove, they admit Karaites are Jews. They don't say that about Samaritans, because Samaritans are not even following the Bible because they have a different Bible. Right? The Karaites accept our Torah. Our Torah and the Karaite Torah is the same Torah. The Samaritan Torah is different. So there are phrases there. So there are phrases in our Torah that seem to think that gives the impression that there are words missing. So from the very beginning, like Cain and Abel went out to the field, and then Cain kills Abel. What happened out in the field? There's like a missing text. So the Samaritan Bible, I'm not sure, might have a verse or two that fills in the blank. And there are a couple of places like that in the Torah where it seems like there's a blank. So the Samaritan Bible fills that in or replaces a couple of words. So that's not our Bible then, and because of that, they're not considered, that and other things, other practices that they have they're not considered Jewish. Okay, and also the fact that they weren't exiled with us to Babylonia. So there's something about them that made the Babylonians think that the Samaritans are not Jews. Okay, so that's now we fast forward to our day. So we know there's no halacha, there's no Jewish law about opening the ark. It's just custom. Somebody has to do it. Who's going to do it? But is it even considered an honor? That's a question. But yes, it is something that's done in the synagogue, and that's why some of the sources talk about it. So the question today is similar to what I just mentioned about the Kutians. These are people who aren't Jewish who are in the synagogue. So in our day and age, we have people who aren't Jewish who come to synagogue. And synagogues see non-Jews in synagogue on a frequent basis. The more B'nai Mitzvah there are every week, the more non-Jews there are going to be there because non-Jews are invited to B'nai Mitzvahs, whether it's colleagues from work or whether it's members of the family. Okay, so more often than not, every family, and I don't mean to highlight people around the table, but almost every Jewish family today has a non-Jew who is a member of the family, from a daughter-in-law or a son-in-law to an extended relative. There is somebody not Jewish in the family who is going to be invited for family simchas. And then the question is, can you give the non-Jewish member of your family or close associate from work or friend an honor in the service? And every synagogue has a different way to deal with. Every non-Orthodox synagogue has a way to deal with that. Okay, so this is a class about conservative Judaism, but we just should understand that in Orthodox synagogues this isn't an issue. Orthodox Jews work with non-Jews. Orthodox Jews have non-Jewish members in their family. But it's clear in an Orthodox synagogue that only Orthodox men are going to be participating in the service. And if they have a women's tefillah, so a women's alternative service, it's going to be Orthodox women who are participating, in Orthodox Jewish women participating. So it's only in the non-Orthodox world when men and women are sitting together and where we are where it'd be more likely to have more non-Jews in attendance, that we'd even consider raising the question, can we give an honor to someone who is not Jewish in the service? So, yes, Saul.
Well, in the Orthodox world, can non-Jews carry or touch the Torah?
So Saul is asking, in the Orthodox world, can non-Jews carry or touch the Torah? So they would admit, because the sources are pretty clear, that yes, they can, but in the synagogue service, it won't happen. It would be part of the policy of the Orthodox synagogue. Well, it might not even be policy because nobody would even think about raising the question. But if they raised the question, it would be immediately shot down by saying, of course, only Jews can participate in all aspects of the service, which means even carrying the Torah out of the ark or opening the ark. So, yeah, so it's not a question in Orthodox synagogues. Adriana. If you're not Jewish, how can it be an honor? Because I think so some Jews around the table have been to church service. And depending on the kind of, whether it's Catholic or Protestant, there are people participating in the liturgy and in the formality of the service. And I think he would just would assume that those people who are participating either are designated by the community to do so, they are officials designated to participate in the service, or they have received some honor that day to do that. Right? So that's why I think people would assume that whatever happens in a synagogue, anybody not Jewish looking at what's happening in a synagogue would be comparing to what happens in their church or in their mosque or in their other house of worship, and assume that however it's done there, it's done here as well. Yeah.
Well, maybe I should say it differently. Why, I can see maybe the question is, can a non-Jew do the prayer for peace, and where should that person be standing?
Right.
Rather than you participating in the religion you're not part of. I don't know.
Right. So why part? Okay. So Adriana gets to the crux of the matter. Participating in a religion that you're not part of. Okay. So that's the question. Right. So one of the sociological points that David Booth brings up in his paper is that let's just focus on a bar bat mitzvah as opposed to an ufruf or baby naming that might be happening on the bima on a Shabbat morning too. Let's talk about bar bat mitzvah, so which is the most common, in which b'nai mitzvah families are permitted in every synagogue to designate some honors for their family and friends. So we're unusual, Shaare Tefila is, when it comes to giving out honors, in that we allow the family to take all the honors, and we even make extra honors for the families to give out. Right? So instead of 7 aliyot for the Torah, we make up to 10 aliyot. So that's unusual. So in the larger synagogues where lots of things are going on, every Shabbat, a bar mitzvah family is allowed 3 honors to give out. Okay, so the question then is, if the parents of the bar mitzvah, one is Jewish, one is not Jewish, how do you recognize the non-Jewish parent? Because the non-Jewish parent, obviously, well, it should be obvious if the non-Jewish parent is there at their son's bar mitzvah, that the non-Jewish parent agreed to raise their child Jewish and to give them a Jewish education and to provide the opportunity for the child to have a service to mark becoming an adult Jew. So if the non-Jewish parent has agreed to that process, maybe it would be appropriate to allow the non-Jewish parent to state publicly in some way their affirmation of this whole process. Okay, so the way we do it in our congregation when there is a non-Jewish parent is that right, and every synagogue is different when it comes to these logistics, and it's all a slippery slope. So the way we do it here is that the child is called to the Torah and recites the Aliyah, and usually 9 times out of 10 they are reading that portion from the Torah. So their parents have the Aliyah right before, so that they're on the bima watching their child read from the Torah and receive that honor. So they're right there next to them. However, if there's a non-Jewish parent, the non-Jewish parent is not there at that moment, because receiving an honor and reciting the blessing over the Torah is not something a non-Jew can do. That's at least what we say. Because the blessing that you're saying is Asher bachar banu mikol ha'amim v'natan lanu et Torato. Okay, so another blessing would be Asher kitshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu. Okay, that's so. Who has sanctified us by his commandments and commanded us. So if the blessing said that, it makes sense that a non-Jew can't say that, because a non-Jew isn't part of the community that feels sanctified by these commandments. They are not commandments for the non-Jew. They are commandments for the Jew. Okay, but that's not the formula of the blessing. The formula of the blessing is Asher Bachar Banu Mikol Hamim, who has chosen us from among all the peoples, V'natan Lanu et Torato, and gave us his Torah. Okay, so now Reconstructionist synagogues change that order, those words, because who has chosen us from among all the peoples make it seem as if Judaism is better than other religions, that we're being elitist and reciting this blessing. That's not what that means. We're thanking God for the gift of the Torah. So, and it should make us feel special, and it should make us feel different. Doesn't make us feel better, it makes us feel different. So, someone who is committed to the covenant, of which the Torah is an expression of that covenant, makes sense to recite that blessing. So, a non-Jew is not part of that covenant, so it doesn't make sense for the non-Jew to recite the blessing. Now, some synagogues will allow the non-Jew to be up there and just be quiet. Let the Jewish parent say the blessing and let the non-Jewish parent just stand there. So we don't do that here at Shaare Tefila, but there are conservative synagogues that will do that. What we do then, so the Jewish parent is there at the Torah, watching their son or daughter read the next aliyah, and then I recite the blessing for becoming bar mitzvah, the special mishaberach. At that point, the Torah is covered. There's a pause in the service, and I call up the non-Jewish parent to join their son, daughter, and husband, wife for that blessing. So that's how we do it here. In other synagogues, they don't even allow a non-Jew on the bima, so they'll go off the bima to recite that blessing. So no, there's nothing wrong with being on the bima. Anybody can be on the bima, but it's it's a slippery slope. It's a matter of degree. So we cover the Torah, and the non-Jewish parent is there because to acknowledge that yes, they have guided their son, daughter to this point, taught them the commandments, and the prayer is that they'll continue to lead them to a life of good deeds, and also to the chuppah, and etc. So, and then sing Siman Tov and Mazel Tov as the candy is thrown. That there's nothing wrong with that. And the other honors parts of the service that we're giving out that are seen as honors would be prayers that are interfaith kind of prayers. So, and the prayer for Israel, I argue, is something that makes sense for Jews to say because we have a connection to Israel that prayer reflects. The non-Jews don't have. Now, lots of non-Jews have a connection to Israel. There are Christian Zionists around, but still, that's not exactly what the prayer is talking about. The prayer is talking about it from a Jewish context, this connection to the state of Israel. So, again, in our synagogue, the prayer for the state of Israel, only Jews recite. But the prayer for our country, all Americans can recite. So I would argue anybody who's an American can recite that blessing or is in the process of becoming an American. Let's say it that way. So it would be interesting. Nobody's asked me that question. Can their relative from Europe recite the prayer for the country? I would say that would be inappropriate for them to do that because America's not their country.
I don't think the prayer for the country names any kind of country.
Well, that's so Saul is saying the prayer for the country doesn't name the country. It's possible that that's true about the prayer for America, but in Canada, there's a different prayer there that mentions the Queen of England being the sovereign of Canada, and so yes,
It just says that we hope our leaders will lead us and be honest.
Right, that could be our English translation of that, but. I think it might say president.
No.
It
says our leaders.
Leaders and advisors.
And all
right.
Those just.
Right. Yes. So page 148, Adriana, you're looking up. It doesn't say president. Okay. So I'm wondering if the Black prayer book, the former prayer book, had it specifically saying the president of these United States. So it might have said that. Okay, so yes, so the prayer so that's Sim Shalom, the conservative movement prayer book. That's their way of saying that makes that prayer maybe applicable to countries other than America, because every country has leader and advisors. Okay, but what I'm saying that I've been to synagogues in Canada where there's a special Canadian prayer, and the prayer book for England has a special prayer for England, for that prayer for the country. And obviously the prayer for the country in Israel is the prayer for Israel, but it's longer, has a few more paragraphs. So anyway, that's the prayer for the country. Prayer for peace. Everybody wants peace, and there's nothing in there that says we want Jewish peace. We just want peace in the whole world. So that's something that non-Jews can do. So the question is the ark, because we have this shtick, and I say that to all B'nai Mitzvah families. That what do you find?
The old one does have.
Aha.
This Republic, the president.
There you go. So the old one, the Silverman prayer book, the black prayer book, had President of these United States, and this new Sim Shalom does not. Okay, so I say to all B'nai Mitzvah families that we have this shtick, and some families see it as shtick, and some people see it as a nice ceremony. So it's up to families to decide whether they want to do it. Where we have the grandparents come up onto the bima when the bar mitzvah boy, bat mitzvah girl is leading the Torah service. It's the first thing they're doing in the service. So when they start leading the service, their parents, their grandparents come up onto the bima if the family wants to do this. The grandparents open the ark. We take the father of the bar bat mitzvah takes the Torah out of the ark and passes it down to the 3 generations there. And I say something like, just as Torah is being passed down in your family, so may you see the day that you'll pass the Torah down to future children and grandchildren. So like I say, some people see that as shtick and schmaltzy, and other people say, no, it's very nice, let's do it. So what if grandparents and a parent is not Jewish? Right? So you can have 2 grandparents. No, theoretically you can have 4 grandparents. Right? What if the parents of the bar mitzvah have converted to Judaism? Right? So the parents are Jewish, but the grandparents are not. So what if both parents have converted to Judaism? That could happen too. So you can have 4 grandparents on the bima and a parent not Jewish on the bima. So I suggest to families in that situation, let's not do the passing the Torah, because not every family chooses to do it anyway. And we just don't do this. But now, this teshuvah gives that opportunity to say we can do it. Why? Because the same reason for reciting the Mishaberach prayer for the bar mitzvah, the family has been part of the process of raising this grandchild as a Jew. They have some connection to Judaism because you would assume that coming to the bar mitzvah or bat mitzvah service is not the first Jewish thing that they've encountered in their family. That perhaps they've been to a Seder, perhaps they've been to a Shabbat dinner, perhaps they've had latkes on Hanukkah. Okay, so whatever it is, they've done something Jewish together as a family that recognizes the fact that Judaism is a part of their life. And so opening the ark and taking the Torah out and even touching the Torah is simple recognition of the fact that Judaism is part of our life. It's not saying that I'm Jewish. That's the argument that Rabbi David Booth is saying in his paper. And so that just stretches the slippery slope. Right, so which we can tell by the vote for this paper was a question, because 8 people voted in favor of this and 12 voted against it. Okay, so it didn't say, that doesn't mean that the paper's rejected. It means that all rabbis need to know what the nature of the debate was among the law committee about this. And the names here are given of those voting in favor. And if you look at the people who are voting in favor, they are a mix, really, of very traditional people and very liberal people. So Danny Nevins, for example, voted in favor of this, and he's the current dean of the rabbinical school. So we overlapped in rabbinical school. He was a pulpit rabbi in the Detroit suburbs for many years before being tapped to be the dean of the rabbinical school. So he's voting from a practical perspective. He saw bar mitzvahs and bat mitzvahs in his synagogue every week, and he knows what David Booth is talking about. Yet I would say he's a center. He's a centrist in the conservative movement, though he's one of the authors of the homosexuality paper from 9 years ago. But we also have Lowell Weiss, who is from the Boston suburbs, who's also a center traditionalist. So also, but a pulpit rabbi, and obviously, so all pulpit rabbis have dealt with this. All non-Orthodox pulpit rabbis have dealt with this very issue. And you rightly deliberate over this. It shouldn't be something easy that you're just saying no. And because it lacks feeling when you're just saying no to a member of the family. You want to be yes. You want to be open. You want to work with the family because if you want to look at it this way, the synagogues are a business, and it's a customer service business, customer satisfaction. So if you say no in business, if you say no to your customer doesn't come back. If you work with your customer, give them a discount, or whatever, then you get a customer for life, right? So if you're saying no, then that raises an issue. So how do you say no to make it sound yes? Okay, so that's how we have the compromise of the non-Jews being involved in the service in a different way. So this isn't something that necessarily we're going to adopt, and also that's why I included the dissenting opinion here, for just to see their perspective, the rabbis who were opposed to this, who are the more traditionalists among the law committee, and including a rabbi, Ruvain Hammer, who has lived for the past 40 years in Israel, and they don't really have to deal with this in Israel, but he was a pulpit rabbi in America before moving to Israel. So again, it's that slippery slope. How much of a compromise are you willing to make? Rabbi David Booth, who is in the suburbs of San Francisco, so just put it out there that California is a little bit more liberal than the rest of America when it comes to conservative synagogues. They're in the forefront of liberal innovations, right? Synagogues that have allowed musical instruments on Shabbat. It started in California and moved east. Okay, so allowing non-Jews to participate in the service starts in California and moves east. So any liberal element in Judaism starts out west and moves east. Okay, so even though David Booth's synagogue is a more traditional synagogue as far as California synagogues go, it's still a California synagogue. So if whoever is watching this out there in the internet world, I'm not denigrating California at all. I'm just talking about the sociological aspect of conservative synagogues in California. Okay, so just for us to be able to understand the context and who is David Booth and who's he writing for and why he's being convinced, because I would suggest that if he were a pulpit rabbi in Teaneck, New Jersey, where there is a very traditional conservative synagogue, if he was a rabbi there, he might not be prompted or might not feel the need to write this paper. Whereas being in California, and in that sociological context and demographic context, he might feel the need to do that, and he might also feel more supported to write such a paper too. Marv?
12 people voted against it.
Yes.
8 people voted for it.
Yes.
So it means that it didn't pass.
No, it does pass.
It does.
You need 6 votes for it to be an accepted paper of the law committee, which means any rabbi can follow it as long as it has 6 votes. So it has 8 votes, and so any synagogue can follow this procedure now. if they want to. Now, so the way it works in our synagogue and most synagogues is that the rabbi is considered the Mara Da'atra, which means which is Aramaic for the halachic authority of the synagogue. Okay, but most rabbis know that it's a process, and for when decisions happen, especially ritual decisions happen, it's best if the community is involved in that process. So that's why there's a religious committee or a religious life committee or religious affairs committee, however synagogues call it, and they talk about these issues and come up with a policy that would then be adopted by the board of the congregation as the religious policy of the synagogue.
30% of the law committee voting yes.
So 8, 12, and 4 abstentions. So there are 24 people on the law committee. Right. So 8 of them, a third of them voted for this, which was enough to make it an acceptable position. Yes, that's how it works. So good or bad. What? Try to figure out why, because that is the unique, and some say the downfall of the conservative movement, in that it allows for divergence of opinion. So, as I've said before, in both weeks before this one, the decision of the law committee to allow people to drive to synagogue on Shabbat was a minority opinion back in the 1950s, but it had the requisite amount of votes and therefore was an accepted position, so that now almost every conservative synagogue in America has people driving to it on Shabbat. I would say not almost. I would say every conservative synagogue in America has people driving to it on Shabbat because of that position paper, which was a minority paper. Okay? But rabbis, I would say most conservative rabbis in America do not drive to synagogue on Shabbat. So it creates, having majority and minority opinions creates different segments of the community, and it stretches the limit as to where people feel comfortable within the conservative movement. So that when in the 1970s, when egalitarianism started to be discussed piece by piece in the law committee, it drove a wedge at that time within the conservative movement. Those who were traditionalists, who wanted to maintain the practice of women not participating in the service. And at the time, when women, the first paper was, can women count in a minyan? Can women have an aliyah? And then, can women lead the service? Can women be rabbis? So by 1984, when the law committee said, yes, women can be ordained as rabbis, that was the final straw that broke the camel's back. And there was a bunch of people that left the conservative movement at that time and founded a new organization called the Union for Traditional Judaism, which, as far as I know, 30 years later, doesn't exist anymore. Because now you can count on one hand the number of conservative synagogues that are not egalitarian at all. So you have Har Zion in our area, and Silver Spring is the only conservative synagogue between here and New York City that is not egalitarian, and between here and Florida, really, that is not egalitarian. There might be one or two in Miami, conservative synagogues that are not egalitarian, maybe. And then in New York, there are still a couple that are not egalitarian, and in Toronto, there are a couple of non-egalitarian conservative synagogues, and that's it. Every other conservative synagogue. So this is the last statistic that I remember is from 10, 15 years ago, where it was 83% of conservative synagogues are egalitarian. So it's more than that now. So so all of that about the the divergence of opinion and creating different communities. So there's a community of conservative rabbis versus members of the congregation, right? So I'm not saying this in a good way or a bad way. How many people in our congregation only walk to synagogue on Shabbat besides me? One person. They don't need to say the name. There's one person, only one person who walks to synagogue on Shabbat. And he's getting married next year, and he's going to be driving to synagogue on Shabbat then. So that'll leave me as the only person. But that's okay. I'm not saying it good or bad. I'm just saying there's a different level of observance then that the minority and majority opinion, or now they don't call it minority majority, just different opinions that have the requisite amount of votes, that creates within the conservative movement. So it might create an atmosphere in which people are comfortable in synagogue or not comfortable based on what's going on in the synagogue. So some synagogues, a lot of conservative synagogues, read only the third of the Torah reading as opposed to the whole Torah reading. For some people, that's just not a comfort level that they feel comfortable with, and they'll ask ahead of time, how much of the Torah do you read? If they're going shul hopping and they're moving to the area, they want to know what synagogue they want to go to, and one issue would be whether they read the whole Torah reading or only read the third. So that creates a different element within the community. Barry.
So the question is, if only 5 people had voted for this, then you would be prohibited from doing it.
Right. We wouldn't even be discussing it, because if only 5 people voted for this, he's asking, so it wouldn't be an accepted paper, and we wouldn't be discussing it. Okay? Because it had the requisite votes, it becomes an accepted paper, and it's published, and it's on the website, and it'll be, so it's a published, accepted position. But at the same time, the law committee agreed to publish a dissenting opinion, which wasn't voted on, but was just there. That's what it says. The introduction to the dissenting opinion says, these are the 12 people who voted against it, said this paper was submitted in November 2013 as a dissent to non-Jews opening the Ark. Dissenting and concurring papers are not official positions of the Committee for Jewish Law and Standards. And it has, the people who wrote it are the people who voted against, plus the abstention. So it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. 11 people actually wrote this. So it's made up of people who voted against and also the abstainers. So 11 people voted, decided to write the dissenting opinion, and that sometimes happens. So, for example, when it came to the homosexuality papers that were published in 2006, you had the one major paper that allowed it, and then you had dissenting opinions too, so that the average rabbi, me, for example, wants to think about adopting this paper as policy of Shaare Tefila. I have what to go on. Okay, and that, to be fair, I wouldn't just be presenting to the religious committee Rabbi Booth's opinion. I would be presenting the dissenting opinion too, so that people know that here are papers that people spent some time researching, writing about, talking about the sociological impact. Sandy and
so as a pulpit rabbi,
yes,
you are not commanded to do this.
Right.
You get to make up your own mind.
Right. I get to make up my own mind, and in fact, I don't even need the law committee to tell me what to do. I can make my own mind up. Any rabbi ordained by the conservative movement or accepted as a member of the rabbinical assembly. So you don't need to be ordained by the Jewish Theological Seminary or the American Jewish University or the Seminario in Buenos Aires, or there's one in Hungary, or there's one in Jerusalem. All those places, you graduate from there as a rabbi, you're automatically a member of the Rabbinical Assembly, which is the organization of conservative rabbis, or you could be ordained someplace else, but decide that you want to be a conservative rabbi. You decide that conservative movement ideology is your ideology. You can apply to be a member of the Rabbinical Assembly. So Rabbi Stuart Weinblatt, for example, of B'nai Tzedek, is ordained by the Hebrew Union College, which is the ordaining institution of the Reform movement. But he feels comfortable as a conservative rabbi. He applied to be a member. So to do that, you have to write some papers, answer some questions in written form, and have an oral interview in front of the membership committee of the Rabbinical Assembly, and then be voted on at the next convention. That's how it works. So every convention, the graduates of all the rabbinical school are read out loud, and they are formally adopted as members of the Rabbinical Assembly. And then all those who came up before the membership committee are brought forward too and adopted that way as well. Anybody then who is a member of the Rabbinical Assembly, has the right and authority to decide matters of Jewish law for their community. I, however, decide not to do that because I just don't think that that's right. I don't think that's the way that synagogue should work, number one. And number two, I also don't think that I am knowledgeable enough about all matters of Jewish law, as these rabbis are, more expert on the Talmud and the Shulchan Aruch and all other Jewish legal sources.
So you're a more go with the flow.
No, not. I wouldn't call it go with the flow. I'm a union guy. I'm a union guy as opposed to a scab. Okay, so I decide. So, for example, that Rabbi Mark. No. It's not the comfort level. It's just it's just the personality. That's all. Or that depends on the issue, too. I mean, if there's some issue that I feel really, really strongly about, that the conservative movement hasn't written about, then I might advocate for that position and follow that position. But there hasn't been one. But as opposed to Rabbi Mark Loeb, may he rest in peace, from Bethel in Baltimore. So he officiated at commitment ceremonies for gay couples long before the conservative movement allowed it, as part of before the law committee said it was okay. And in fact, while he did it, the law committee was officially said rabbis should not do it. But Rabbi Mark Loeb, see, I guess another thing, if I were a rabbi of a 1,500 family synagogue, I might be in a better position to say that this is the way I want to do it, and to heck with the Rabbinical Assembly. See if you dare to kick me out of the Rabbinical Assembly. So Rabbi Mark Loeb had that power behind him, and he officiated at commitment ceremonies long before 2006, when it became officially proper to do so. And there are, I guess there are other matters like that maybe the law committee would have said no to, that individual rabbis would say, to heck with the law committee, I'm going to do this anyway and see what you're going to do about it. Because religiously, I am the Mara Da'atra, and I have the right to interpret Jewish law the way I want to, and the way I feel I can. So I just don't feel that I want to do that. I don't have that kind of attitude about me. And anything that has come up, if there's been an issue, I've addressed it to the law committee and have gotten an answer about it that I have felt comfortable with. So, for example, there was an issue a couple years ago in our preschool. So there's an issue as to when you convert to Judaism. It's easy for a woman to convert to Judaism. Study as an adult. You study, brought before a Beit Din, a tribunal of 3 rabbis, immersed in a mikveh, you're done. A man, however, needs one other thing, and we know what that is. And so if the person has already been circumcised, it's a little bit easier, but still a drop of blood has to be taken. So this is true of all males who convert to Judaism. So it's easier as an adult, you know what's going on, and you're aware of it, and I can say this all I want, but it's really not a big deal. It is a big deal for a child, let's say an adopted child. So you adopt a child, and the child is already past 8 days old, and the child is not born Jewish. If you want to raise the child in a conservative synagogue, that child has to be converted to Judaism. So then what do? So the child is supposed to be circumcised. What if the child has already been circumcised? And the parents just would be traumatized by the baby having to go, or the 2-year-old or the 3-year-old. How do you explain, especially in this day and age of, sexuality, sexual abuse, all of that? It's really, really, really sensitive. So there was a family where I explained that this would have to be done, and the family said, okay, and they went to a Reform synagogue. So after that, I asked the chairman of the law committee, if the child's already circumcised, could that count? Could we just go to the mikveh? And he said, yes, that would be okay. And I said, it would be really helpful if you publicize that, so that I'm not the only one knowing about this. I never heard anything again. So, if the law committee passes a paper about Shabbat and sports on Shabbat, that you have to be in the Eruv and all that technical, and sounds almost orthodox. I can understand then why the committee, and this paper, this is so, opening the ark. What's the big deal about opening the ark? But there's there's status to it. It represents something. I understand that, but there really, push comes to shove, there's no halacha behind it. What's the big deal about it? But I can understand what it represents. And if that doesn't get a majority of the law committee, then a question about whether a child needs hatafat dam, the drop of blood taken, can understand then how that would be voted down. But this is the chairman of the law committee said that to me in writing, in an email, saying, yes, I would say that that child does not, if he was already circumcised, he does not need to, you can, after the fact, you can say that is like a bris, and going to the mikveh completes the process. So, wow, radical, but it was too late for that family, but now I have it in my back pocket for any other future family to do that. So, and anybody can, anybody who joins the synagogue now, really the technical issue is you have to be you have to have a bris in order to participate fully in the Jewish community. Okay, to have an aliyah, to do everything, take on leadership roles. I don't ask that question for people who come, and now there are a lot of people who don't have brises, right? There are a lot of families who just decide get the circumcision done in the hospital, right? But I don't ask the question because I don't want to know the answer. Because if I know the answer, then I'm confronted with the answer that's in the law codes. I'm going to tell them that no, you can't participate in the service. You have to have a drop of blood now taken. What are you, crazy, Rabbi? Right? So I can't do that. So I'd rather not ask the question that I don't want to have an answer to. So that's what I do. And is that right? Okay, it's a way around it, but it's stretching the limits. It's more than a comfort zone. It's a matter of recognizing the practical realities today, and that I don't want to get into an area where I know that people won't join the synagogue then, right? And so I'm sure that I'm not the only rabbi who would have that policy. I'm sure that other rabbis would do the same thing. And this mostly happens when strangers come to me and ask me to officiate at their wedding. So I just ask for their Hebrew names. That's enough for me to get a sense of their background. I don't know my Hebrew name. Okay, so call your mom. And then they'll call their mom right there in the meeting with me. Or they'll say, well, I'm not Jewish. Okay, well, that's how I broach the topic. Give me your Hebrew name. If they can give me Hebrew names, that's all I need to know. I'm not going to ask.
You learned that from my grandfather.
Maybe I should ask, have you converted to Judaism? But if they're giving me Hebrew names, if they say if it's Ben Avraham and Sarah, well, that's a red flag, because when you convert to Judaism, you become the child of Abraham and Sarah. Okay, then I'll ask. But if it's Motol and Razel as your parents, then okay, I think you're Jewish, right? So I'm just saying that's just how it works, and it's the practical realities of how this works today. So is this paper by Rabbi Booth, something that we should discuss as a religious committee? I'm not sure. It hasn't turned anybody away from the synagogue yet. And we have had a number of families for which this definitely applies, and they understand. I've had the conversation with them as sensitively as I can over the years, and they have been very satisfied with that and stayed with the synagogue, so that sibling number 2 and number 3 have had their bar bat mitzvahs as well, and it has gone fine. And sometimes by then, the non-Jewish parent has converted. I mean, that's not an issue. That's not necessary. But some families decide that. So
this paper said no. They can't.
They can what? To open the ark? This paper said you can open the ark.
Okay.
Yeah. But I'm just saying that I'm not sure I would adopt this paper or encourage our religious committee, even bring it up to our religious committee to say that this should be Shaare Tefila policy. I'm saying that I don't think it's necessary to do so.
So
Anyway, yes, Sherry.
So we're not
allowing non-Jews to open the Ark now?
We have never allowed non-Jews to open the Ark. So I'm just saying that I'm not sure that I would bring this up to change that policy. I'm not sure it's necessary to do so. But some of you here are, 3 of you are on the religious committee. 4 of you are on the religious committee. And we got a past president of the congregation around the table who could very well say, I learned this paper, we should bring this up to the religious committee. It's your prerogative to do so. Contact Paul Tillis, our religious vice president, say you want to bring this up on the agenda, and we'll discuss it, and we'll study the papers like we're doing here, both papers, and it'll be. I would feel comfortable either way, but I'm saying that I'm not so sure that this is something that we need to adopt.
So, is there anything in that paper that would make you feel comfortable now?
Like I said, I am comfortable with this paper. I understand completely where he's coming from. I would
any and all of it.
I accept Rabbi Booth's opinion. Yes, I absolutely do. But I think for our congregation, I don't think it's necessary to do this.
And did that paper address the aliyahs?
No, it said absolutely said no aliyot. It's only opening the ark, and even carrying the Torah around would be fine. So somebody walking around the congregation with it would be fine because there's nothing halachic about it. There's nothing halachic about it. It's symbolic, but it's not halachic. Okay, so that's the idea. So So here we are in a suburb of Washington D.C., not a suburb of San Francisco. So we have a different attitude about this. Imagine if we were in Berkeley, California, not having a non-Jew carry the Torah. How dare you be so racist and bigoted and multicultural? Okay, so I'm not saying that's a wrong attitude. It's just not our attitude. There could be congregations in Washington that would have this similar non-conservative one, Reconstructionist Reform synagogues that might have that very attitude to say that it's open to everybody. The Torah is for everybody. It's everybody. It's in everybody's Bible, so everybody feels connected to the Torah. Why can't they carry it? I'm just saying that I don't think it's necessary for our congregation to adopt this policy. But if you feel otherwise, please feel free to contact Paul.
So somebody submits a list of people to do things.
Oh, I talked to them before. No, they don't just submit the list. That's not how it works. I meet with every bar and bat mitzvah family 2 months beforehand to go over, and we have a list of honors that I have in a bar and bat mitzvah handbook that every family gets 2 years before the bar and bat mitzvah. So we have a bar and bat mitzvah family meeting 2 years before the bar and bat mitzvah where we talk about this. Then I say 2 months, a year beforehand at the most, up to 8 months before, you start working with the bar and bat mitzvah tutor. Then 2 months before, you're going to have a meeting with me. We're going to go over the logistics of the service, and at that meeting, I say, these are the things that non-Jews can do in the service, and everything else they can't do. And so if it's a non-Jewish member of the family, a parent, I've had that conversation already long before 2 months. Trust me, I've had it. So it's not news to them. What? I've been expecting all along to have full participation. Now you're surprising me? No, it's not like that. So it's really, it hasn't been an issue. And if it had been an issue, now it's never been I'm saying it really has not been an issue. All families have come to terms with this about how they are going to participate or not participate in the service, and they've been fine, and they've stayed members of the synagogue. So it hasn't been an issue enough to talk about it on the religious committee to say that we should change this policy. Yes, so.
I have one comment and then a question.
Yeah.
You relieved me a little today because I was always worried when we carried the Torah around. There are some non-Jews who kiss the Torah as it's going around.
Yeah.
And I always thought, how can that be?
Right. It's not an issue. Nothing makes the Torah not holy.
Now, the other thing is, I've always thought or been told that the reader's table, that a non-Jew cannot touch it or be at the reader's table where the canner is or where the Baal Tefila is. What about that?
So Saul's asking about whether a non-Jew can be at the lectern, or it's known in Hebrew as the Amud or the Shulchan, where the person leading the service is. There's nothing wrong with that, and there's not, because the non-Jew comes up to the way it works in our shul is that I stand at the lectern on the bima from where the Torah is being read, and the non-Jews are coming up there to read the prayer for peace and the prayer for our country. So there's that. If you want to argue anything, that lectern is holier than the other lectern that the person leading the service is doing it from. So there's no difference.
That where the rabbi stands, it's okay to have a non-Jew, but where the cantor stands, where they're reciting the service.
No, so Saul's saying what he was told is that there's a difference in status in the podiums. No, it's just custom, synagogue custom. So no, there is nothing halachic about the podium itself. There isn't. What only makes it halachic is what's happening at the podium. So if the service is being conducted with blessings, then only someone who is part of the covenant, someone who is Jewish, can recite that. If the Torah is being read, then only someone who is subject to the covenant of the Torah can be at the Torah. Okay, but if the Torah is not there, and if the Siddur, the prayer book, isn't there, and the service isn't happening at that time, there's a pause for prayer for country, prayer for peace, it's totally fine. And what about those synagogues where they have a guest priest or minister coming in to give a sermon? So where are they going to? They're going to have a separate podium from that for them? It doesn't work that way. So either in Orthodox synagogues they won't be coming in at all, or in non-Orthodox synagogues there's nothing wrong about it. It's only what's happening at the podium at that time. If the Torah is being read, then in our synagogue non-Jews are not at the Torah. Yeah. So there's a difference between it walking around closed and covered and open and being read from. Closed and covered, it's a holy object. Open, it becomes a mitzvah to fulfill the mitzvah to read from it. Any other thoughts? Yes, Adriana.
The paper is pretty open. It doesn't. It's just a comment.
Yes.
You restrict it a little bit, like the parent and the Jewish parent.
Right. Yes. Right.
The paper is really, keeping somebody from the street, basically. It doesn't limit it to a family member or.
Right. Okay. So Adriana is saying it's not limited to family members. So right, the Pesach, the decision that's on page 11, the halachic, symbolic, sociological factors all argue in favor of an option for non-Jews to open and close the ark, with some countervailing issues. The symbolism of the honor and its connection to Revelation suggests including non-Jews who are also traditionally said to be present at Revelation. Finally, our moment in history following the vision of Isaiah is one of great hopefulness in our interactions with non-Jews that suggest opening our doors in much the same ways as Isaiah imagines opening the temple practice. The honor should be done in a meaningful way by Jew and non-Jew alike. As a result, ushers ought to instruct a first-time recipient of this honor that it symbolizes revelation and encourages the congregation to a greater level of focus and intensity in prayer. So I was only saying that in practical circumstances, the gabbai, the person giving out the honors, is not going to give it out to a stranger who's just walking in off the street. Honors in the synagogue service go to usually guests of the bar and bat mitzvah, to make them feel part of it, make the family feel a little bit more special in the service, or it goes to people in the congregation who are regular. Sometimes we bring it in to visitors to make them feel good, people who are checking us out, make them feel. But a non-Jew who's checking us out, there would be no reason to give them an honor. I'm just saying, for practical purposes, it's usually a member of the family who would be getting an honor, and not just some random person. That's all.
So, most any time that you've given an honor to someone visiting, you've known who they were.
I've known that they're Jewish because I have a tallis on, and I have a little conversation with them. And it's also the kind of tallis that they have on. Like, they bring their own tallis. Okay, so, they didn't take it off our rack. You kind of figure, and even if they take it off our rack, they know what they're doing. And I watch them, too, because I'm standing by the door, and they're saying a bracha before they're putting it on. So they know what they're doing. It's not just because they've seen somebody else do it. So, yes. So in that way, do I know them? Yes, it seems pretty fair
Right.
assumption that they're Jewish
Right. Okay.
and that they're visiting us, and so why not be
Right.
nice to them
Right.
and say,
I appreciate
here's an honor for you. So, all right. So thank you very much for
Thank you.
participating in the class.
Thank you.